Well, welcome, friends. My name is Untitled. I'm from Bethany Theological Seminary in Richmond, Indiana, the USA, and I'll be providing technical support for our webinar today. I'm glad that most of you have found the chat window in the upper left. If you have any tech problems during the presentation, you can just drop me a note there very quickly, but we'll mostly use that area for you to be able to ask questions and make comments and interact with our presenter today. We have two webcasts in this series. The first is today with Captain Kerry Coke, and the second on March 27th will be with Fran Beckett. So be sure to plan to join us then. I also will have continuing education units available and instructions on how to obtain those for those who wish to obtain continuing education units from the Church of the Brethren. And so stick with us till the end, and I'll be able to share that link in those instructions. But for now, I'd like to turn it over to Stan Duick to be able to introduce our presenter for today. Stan, take it away.
Thank you, Anton. It's really a privilege to be here today and to introduce our presenter, Captain Kerry Coke. Kerry, for many of you, if you do not know her, but we have some of her friends and church members with us today. Kerry serves with the Salvation Army, and she serves on the east side of London in the area called known as Stepney. And she has been there for some time. The great thing about Sherry is, one of the great things about Sherry is that she's involved in multicultural ministry. She has centered for years her ministry on incarnational living and is doing so in a large urban housing estate with a predominantly British Bangladeshi Muslim community. And also her husband, Nick, who is a terrific fellow. Together, they have been planting a church for nearly 11 years. And so we're really excited to have Captain Kerry Coke with us today as she shares with us on relational leadership. And so, Kerry, I invite you to come and to share with us at this time. Thank you.
Hello. It's great to join with you. This is a first for me. I've never spoken to people in my slippers before, so maybe I'll get to show them to you later. My name's Kerry, as Dan has said. I'm married to Nick. I have two children, Henry, who is 12 years old, and Penny, who is 10 years old. And I absolutely love living here. I've loved the experience of trying to understand what it means to live here in the East End of London, trying to grapple with issues of leadership as we've planted this church. And I guess there's a bit of self-awareness involved in there too, trying to understand my unique leadership style, what makes me tick and who I am. So as Enton said earlier on, I'd love to hear your views. That's the point of this webinar. It's not just me talking to you, it's us sharing and we together learning about relational leadership. I have a particular question I want to ask you later, but throughout I'll have a number of different issues I'd like you to come in on. So be there, be ready to type, and it would be great to hear from you. And I think from time to time, Stan will let me in on some of the things that you're saying. Before I get into what I'm actually saying, I wanted to explain why I'm talking about relational leadership. And for me, it's all about what has become apparent to me as I've been here in the East End of London for 11 years. I'm a woman. I like to talk, as most women do. And I have discovered that it's not just about talking, about being a woman, that makes me want to talk. It's because relationship, talking is everything to me, to my faith, to this community. And I think if I were to sum up what it means to have faith, what it means to be here, I would say relationship. That's the thing that's most important, our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. It's a great commandment. Love God, love your neighbour. And I think those are the most important things. Now sometimes we put other things first, perhaps a program or buildings, perhaps justice or worship, but really I've come to realize the most important thing, the most fundamental thing is relationship with God and with others. So that's why I've chosen to talk about relationship today, about relational leadership today, because it's a style that I like, I enjoy, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about over the last little while. But let's have a little think for ourselves, shall we? Before I start to unwrap some of those ideas, think for yourself about great leaders that you've come across in your lives. Now, they will probably be people who are still alive now, or who you have known who are alive, not necessarily people from history, people that you have interacted with who are great leaders. Think about these three questions. What was it that was so good about their leadership style? What did they do that was so fantastic? Secondly, have a think about this. How did they make you feel? So this is why you need to interact with them. How did that great leader make you feel as somebody who was following them? And thirdly, I wonder if you can think of any particular incidences, any particular events which highlight why they are so good. So if you've got those three questions, I want you to think about them and maybe type them in, and Stan can repeat them to me later. What was so good about their leadership style? How did they make you feel? So we're talking about your emotions when you're with them. Did they make you happy, sad, angry, frustrated, liberated? How did they make you feel? And can you think of any particular events which can really highlight that? I'll give you a moment to think about that and come back to that in a moment. But I would hazard a guess that the reason why great leaders are so great is because they are highly relational. We'll see if that's what you come up with as well. And just to solidify this for you, think now of a person who isn't such a great leader, a bad leader maybe you'd call them, or not such a great leader, someone who's not so good. How did they make you feel when you think about interacting with them? What was so bad about them, and how did they make you feel? And why do you think that was? Why did that person make you feel like that? I'm imagining it's because those particular leaders forget or have forgotten that leadership is really all about relationship and all about interacting with other people. They've probably been so intent on forging their own way and doing their own thing that they've forgotten about what's going on in other people all around them. Now, understand, have we got anything already? Have we got any ideas already about what it means to be a good leader? What experiences people have had of good leaders?
Kerry, I'll jump in for Stan.
Okay.
Ashley has shared that she thought of one person in particular, Gigi Gonzalez, who was full of grace and understanding and gave others the chance to develop and grow. And then Karen has added leaders that encourage others to use their gift.
Okay, so these are leaders who get to know the people that are following them, are intentional about that, and then try to grow them and develop them. I think that's a really key thing there, Anton, about knowing who you're with and knowing how you're going to empower them and move them forward. Let me tell you a story, and it's a story about tea. You would expect it from me, being an English girl. Oh, that's my husband, by the way. Not the girl, the boy. He's a great leader. There he is. Here's a story about tea. I love tea. We Brits, we drink it all the time at every opportunity. And when we first moved here to the East End of London nearly 11 years ago, we didn't know anybody at all. And I thought the best way to get to know people was to go and have a good old English cup of tea with them, because that's what we do in Britain. We go and have a cup of tea. And so I got to meet dozens, hundreds, and then eventually, I guess, thousands of people by just having a cup of tea with them. But I discovered some quite interesting things about tea. You see, in England, when somebody comes to your house, the first thing that you say to them is, would you like a cup of tea? It's the very, very first thing. It's the icebreaker, if you like. I don't know what you do in the States, but that's what we do here. Would you like a cup of tea? And that really means to the person who's in the house, who's visiting the house, that means you're welcome, come in, relax, sit down, enjoy yourself. I want to spend time with you. That's really what the underlying theme is of that sentence. However, there are a lot of British Bengali people here, and indeed Bengali people living in this area, and it's a very different experience when you're having a cup of tea with them. Not only does the tea taste different, but how it's served is different. So you go to a Bengali house and you're expecting, would you like a cup of tea, as you step across the threshold, but that's not what happens. You can be there for an hour or an hour and a half and not be given a drink at all, which feels really strange for a British person. You kind of feel unwelcome. And then you're given a cup of tea. Just as you're about to leave, you're given a cup of tea, and then you go home. Now, this went on for quite some time, and I was a bit unnerved about it and asked around, why do people not serve tea? Am I not supposed to be there? Have I gone at the wrong time of day? only to discover that for a Bengali person, a cup of tea is given when they want you to go home. So they'll be happily enjoying your company, and then they'll be thinking, right, I think this is the end of the conversation now, you need to go. Would you like a cup of tea? Means, 10 minutes and off you go. So quite a different experience to coming into a British home. And also in this area, we have quite a growing Chinese community. And that's another different experience. In fact, we have a Chinese couple in our church who have taught me the reason behind this. So you would go to a Chinese home, and again, nobody's offering you a cup of tea. You just come in and you're sitting there. And then you're thinking, well, what's going on? And you do the general chit-chat about the weather. And then the Chinese person says, would you like a cup of tea? And that means, now we're going to talk serious. Now we're going to get down to business, down to what the proper conversation is. So 3 very different incidences there, 3 very different uses for tea, a relationship building thing, which are in 3 different contexts. And I tell you this really just to explain that my context will be very different to yours. People are people, I know that the world over, but their situations will be very different to the one in which I am living and working. And so maybe this is a caveat to say, take what I say and flavour it with the tea of wherever you live, okay? Serve it the way that you would live wherever you are and the people that you're mixing with and listening to. But I guess it does really mean listen to those people. I had to listen and I had to understand and I had to know why tea was being served in this particular way. And then I grew and I was able to lead and understand and develop and empower those relationships in the future. But always look around you at the context. So what is a leader? This is the most important question, I think. What is a leader? Well, whole PhDs have been done on this kind of thing. Whole books have been written, encyclopedias full of that kind of thing. What is a leader? But I think my most favourite definition, and I think probably the most basic and simple one, is a leader is someone who has followers. What is a leader? A leader is someone who has followers. Very simple, very basic, but it's great. Look around you. Are people following you? Are people doing what you want them to do? Are people going in your direction? Are they hanging on your every word? Are they trusting you to make the right decisions? If they are, then you're a leader. So congratulations, or perhaps we should say hallelujah, you're a leader. People are following you. Jesus uses this word follow when he describes himself as a leader. He says, follow me. It's very, very simple. He doesn't say, right, I've got a whole systematic theory here about the structures and the organizational ways that I'm going to be doing things. And if you're in agreement with that, will you come with me? That's not the case at all. He says, follow me. It's very simple, very, very basic. Follow me. Jesus is basically talking to his disciples and he's saying, I know who you are. I know you. Follow me. So the leaders are out there. If you're out there listening, leaders, how are you going to actually get people to follow you? I would suggest that there are a number of ways you can get people to follow you. Some are better than others, but I've actually narrowed it down just for the purposes of today to 2 main leadership styles: the bureaucratic leader and the relational leader. I'm going to be pitting them against each other. I'm not going to be saying one is better than the other, although I do personally favour the relational one. But I'm just going to show you both styles for you to get a flavour and understanding of what it means to be a relational leader. So let's have a look at what these different styles are. We'll start first of all with the bureaucratic leader. Here's a picture of something like a bureau. A bureau really is a desk with drawers. So it's a chest of drawers, if you like, a chest of drawers of different compartments. So I've used that image of a chest of drawers to help us to understand what a bureaucratic leader is, what a bureaucratic structure is. This style of leadership values very highly uniformity, keeping to the rules, sticking to the rules. And it's a place where everyone knows what they're doing. They all have a compartment, they all have a place, and they're all there within this chest of drawers. You're given a leadership role by virtue of your position. So I don't know, you're from different church backgrounds and different kind of styles of doing things, but I guess across the board, we will all have the equivalent of a deacon or an archdeacon or a bishop. You're given that leadership role by virtue of your position. So you get the title, and you're therefore living it out. You're the treasurer of the church. You get the title, and you therefore have that role because of your title. The power is held in the position. The finance person, the treasurer, the power is held in their position. It's highly structured. It's organized. It's a very organized structure. The framework is very clear. Everybody knows what is happening, where they're going. There's a clear, defined place for everything. The vision will come from a centralized place, and it will be dispersed. Meetings are set, agendas are set. People know what's going on. And whilst it is necessary to be very organized, especially in churches which are larger, or in fact, whenever you're working with people, you do need to have a sense of organization and structure. This particular leadership style will often work against relationships, as well as working against doing anything new. The very fact that things are organized and set up in structure can sometimes work against relationships. Let's look now at the relationship model, which I've chosen here to use. A wardrobe. Everything about that open door makes me want to get in it and go through to Narnia, but anyway, that'll be in my dreams for later, I guess. So I've made the relational style of leadership into this wardrobe, okay, rather than a chest of drawers. In a chest of drawers, you've got the compartments all clearly defined. Here in a wardrobe, you have the line where you're hanging your clothes. Everything's in there, but it's a little bit more messy and mixed up. It's still organized, clothes are still hung up, but it's much more fluid. Everybody is respected as having a role. You don't need a position to have a role. Everybody is respected as having a role. It's not so uniform in its structure. Things can get a bit messy and out of place in a wardrobe, and that's how it is with relational leadership style. It's not so uniform in its structure as the bureaucratic style. It values diversity, and even going so far as to seek it out. It wants to have that diversity, to find a little bit of something different, to see how that can flavour the whole. The framework in this style, instead of being so set as the bureaucratic style is, the framework is there are all sorts of possibilities. I mean, that's basically the framework. There are all sorts of possibilities. The vision is built not just from one central location, but is built from amongst the whole group members, recognizing that people support what they create. The power in this particular wardrobe style is held in the idea and not in the position. So where in the bureaucratic style, the treasurer is given his role by virtue, his leadership role by virtue of his position as being, or her position as being in charge of the money, in the relational style, the person who becomes good at money will become the leader, or the person who is good at, well, we'll touch on other things that people could be good at in a little while, but it's not the position that gives them their role, it's the idea, the concept that gives them their position. I guess the biggest difference between the relational leadership style and the bureaucratic leadership style is that here in the wardrobe, every person is seen as a leader. Every person is a leader. In the bureaucratic style, there are chosen leaders for organized purposes. In the relational leadership style, everybody is a leader. Every person is seen as having the potential to be a leader with people following them, and that's a huge difference. So, to the cusp of this idea, at least from my point of view, from the East End of London anyway, relational leadership is less about how we need to develop ourselves and improve our techniques, and more about how we need to develop others and unlock the leadership potential of every member of the body of Christ. So relational leadership is less about ourselves and what we're doing. It's more about others and how we can unlock the leadership potential in them. There's a big difference. I imagine that people listening to this from different churches, different backgrounds, all have different varieties of experiences. I wonder if any of this rings true for you. Whilst you're thinking about that, Stan, what's been coming up? What have we heard people say?
Well, we have a number of people sharing some of their observations, and they have, some have said that they, for example, Elizabeth from Missouri said, I appreciate collaborative leadership. And other people have been talking about that if no one is there with you, then you're like a ship or on a trip alone. And so it seems to be, as I've been listening to you, and also they love the metaphor of having tea. That has received some very positive responses as well. It seems to be that you're speaking of influence. As you've brought that up, and someone once said that if you have any influence at all with anyone, you are a leader, and that seems to connect with what you're saying. And so, what is the in a sense the power or the influence that we have within us that connects into relational leadership?
The power or the influence within us, well, I think that comes from God, from our relationship with God, and the grace that cascades from us to look into other people and to see the potential in that person. I think we are, as Christians, we're different. We're to look at people as God's people and not just as what can we get out of that person. Do you understand what I mean? So
yes.
We look at the whole person. And we look at them to see what can we do, what more can we do with this beautiful thing that is a person created by God, rather than how can I use this person to serve me. The business world will be talking about people as, well, they're, what's the word? It begins with C. I've forgotten what the word is. When they're just commodities. They're commodities, and you can use them. I think as Christians we have something to say about that, and to say we're not using people as commodities. These are people with incredible gifts and talents and skills that we need to unlock. And this is gifts of the Holy Spirit we're talking about, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
and fruit of the Holy Spirit mixed in together. This is about just unlocking that in people's lives.
And as Elizabeth has pointed out as well, it seems to really be hitting on being serious about the priesthood of all believers and the relational styles and all the gifts that we have to it. Also, Martin says, I reckon that we need to think about followership as well as leadership, and that this is true for both of us as Christians following Jesus, but also as human beings following others and being committed to them. Would you like to respond to that comment?
I like that. I've never heard of that before. I like the idea of us being followers of Jesus. I get that completely. But was it a man you said? I didn't catch the name.
Yes, yeah, Martin.
Martin.
Yeah.
I wonder, Martin, if you meant that some of us are just called to be followers and some of us are called to be leaders. I wonder if that's what you're getting at. I've heard that kind of thing before. I'm looking to see if you're writing. No, you're not. Okay.
And maybe he'll add some more comments as well.
Yeah.
And then Graham states above. He says, "Does organization always hinder relationship? And can't an organized leader be relational?" And so, kind of, off the two models, I guess, when is one model appropriate over the other, or how do they merge?
I think you need a bit of both, really. I think I would weigh more heavily on the relational leadership, but there are times within an organizational structure, whether it's a church or whatever, that you do need to have some more bureaucratic stuff, because somebody has to be organized about certain things. And so I think I like to think of myself somewhere holding it in attention. Do you understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Not in tension.
Yeah.
So you're I'm not quite in the middle of it. I think I'm leaning more towards the relational leadership, but I do understand that there are times when you have to speak in. Although, that thing that happens sometimes as a leader when you have to say something is going to hurt somebody or is going to cause ripples of pain because it's the right thing to do, and as a leader you have to do that. I would say that's relational, but some people might look on and see that as being more organizational and structured, we used to have somebody who was in charge of the Salvation Army in Bristol in the UK, Alex Hughes, who was just such a wonderful, beautiful person, who I don't know if you know, the Salvation Army is very, very bureaucratic in its structure. But who people would say he was a fantastic leader because all of that structure was there in the background, and yet somehow he was able to cover it with drapes and beautiful cloth so that you couldn't see that, and what you saw was the relationship shining through. And so in some sense we can kind of hold the two together when we need to, in tension. You have to be organized, you have to be intentional about stuff. Maybe you need to be relational with intentionality, if that makes any sense.
That does. That makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, perhaps our leadership can even become derailed by not having that kind of tension. Well, let's break in our conversation so you can get back to presenting more comments, because there's a couple questions that perhaps should be asked a little later into the presentation. And so this way it gives you a chance to lay out more of your ideas in the context in which you're talking about. So
okay.
I'll come back and we'll visit again. Thanks, Kerry.
Okay. Let me move this one on. So relational leadership, that tension. I think really what I'm suggesting here is a change in our understanding of leadership as it is. So I'm interested in what Martin was saying about, some of us may be called to be followers. I'd like to talk to you further about that if I may at some point later on in this webinar. But I'm thinking about a change in our understanding of leadership. If the definition of a leader is someone who has followers, then it is possible that within our churches we may have our strongest leaders in places that you wouldn't normally expect. Our strongest leaders could be in places that you wouldn't be looking, and you wouldn't be imagining that they would be there. It may be, for example, that the person we go to when we need a meal prepared for a church event or even just refreshments after a service, it may be that that person that we go to is able to gather more followers around them than the person who is responsible for organising prayer ministry. Although traditionally we would label the prayer ministry person as having the leadership skills and being the leader, it could be true that the person who is able to organise the kitchen and organise people around them there is actually the bigger leader. Now, it's just a bit of a change of thought, really, in who a leader is. We will need to have a radical rethink if we're able to be relational leaders, because we'll have to be able to see leadership in places that we didn't expect. The relational leader can harness the leadership potential of everyone, not just the prayer ministry person, but also the person who is organising the food in the kitchen, as well as other people as well. Each person is valued for the leadership potential that they can bring. Let me give you an example, a story from here in Stepney. Would you agree with me that every person has a story to tell? Every person has within them something that's going on, an experience, something from their past, some challenging event, an experience of God working through them. Every person has a story, and every person would really like to tell their story. I think a lot of the time people wear their hearts on their sleeves, but it's all there somewhere. Could it be that we could find a leadership skill in someone who can tell a story about something that they've experienced? We have, this is him on the screen actually, a wonderful young man in our church who has overcome all kinds of difficulty in his life. Here's a man who was born here, brought up here, but who's, by the time he was 4 years old, both of his parents had died. He then went on to be fostered for a short time and then brought up by his sister, who was only about 12 years older than him at the time. Enormous challenges also with his health and learning. But here's a guy who's got an incredible story to tell. Now, this wonderful man, as wonderful and beautiful as he is, he wouldn't be able to stand up in front of the church and give a sermon on bereavement. That's not really his thing, his gifting. But that's how we would traditionally see him as a leader. But he can tell his story, and he does tell his story. When we're in smaller group settings, even as a whole church, he's able to recount what happened to him in his past. He's able to recount how God worked in his life and how God continues to work in his life. And it's incredibly empowering for him to be given the opportunity to share his story. And it's empowering also for other people to connect with his story. And suddenly he's become a leader. Suddenly he is someone with other people following him, wanting to know more about his situation and connecting with him in a different kind of way. Is this prophetic teaching gift, which I believe he has, actually prophetic leadership? Is his gift a new way of looking at leadership? He's not standing at the front presenting a sermon, but here he is leading other people, teaching other people, speaking prophetically. Is this the actual nature of his leadership prophetic? People telling their story and sharing their testimony is a great way of empowering new leaders, and it's a tool that cuts right across culture, gender, class, background. I mean, we find that here in a very multicultural setting where we're living, that sharing your story, telling your story is something that nobody can argue with and nobody can claim to know more about. This is something that you can share. It's incredibly empowering to be able to share your story, to tell how God has worked in your life, and suddenly become a leader with who knows how many people following you. The key is to look at somebody like Rob and unlock their leadership potential. Unlock the potential in every person that we see, no matter what their skills or gifts or character. They may be a person that wouldn't traditionally stand at the front and preach, but here's a person who can lead in other ways. I have to say, we've been weighing up the relational bureaucracy thing, and bureaucracy probably is the thing that would get in the way of the likes of Rob being able to become a leader without a position. Stan, what are people saying at the moment?
Some people are really commenting about what are the different, almost like what are the different styles or the different faces of leadership. One person said, if you want to find the best leaders, look at who is willing to clean the toilets in church. And so I think people are really identifying and locking into the idea that there's leaders everywhere, but how can we best encourage them and bring out those gifts that each one has? Elizabeth makes the comment, or Ashley made the comment, this also makes me think about how children can be the best leaders. Karen in Virginia says, if one does all the work necessary, what happens to the rest of the team? Because there were some comments made about leadership are people who are willing to do what is necessary. And Karen goes on to add, shouldn't a leader be willing to allow others to work to encourage them to work? So perhaps that raises another question. Within a relational style of leadership, are there different ways to be a leader as well? Are there different ways of being relational that perhaps should be considered too?
There are definitely different ways to be a leader. We tend to cite the person at the front as the leader, but that's just one kind of leader, in my opinion. So there are the leaders who are cleaning the toilets, as one of the people said, the delegate said. There are the leaders who see the need and step in. But there are the leaders who find themselves empowered to do something new, get a taste for it, and have these people following them. There are different kinds of leaders. It's just that sadly, we structure them differently, and because this is a new thing really, and we still give more weight to a preacher and a teacher than to the person in the kitchen or cleaning the toilets. But if they've got followers, then they're right up there with the person who's speaking from the front.
Yeah.
I think I'll come on to other kinds of relational stuff in just a moment, shall I?
Well, also, you touch on the story with Rob, and that storytelling is so important for leadership. And perhaps one of the keys for us as leaders is to really be intentional about inviting people to tell their stories. And maybe we don't do that often enough, and we could be, in a sense, derailing our own leadership and the leadership of others. So, say more about how we can invite people into the story, or that we create more of a multi-voice. I'm making that connection between multi-voice and your bureau that you and the image that you showed earlier.
Okay. So there are two ways I think of. I mean, obviously, just sticking someone up the front could be quite intimidating for them. So in our small groups, that might be the first chance to share your story. And here's another one. I don't know how familiar you are over there with community organizing. I mean, it started in the States, but we've got it over here now. And one of the things that happens in community organizing groups is that at the very beginning of any gathering, meeting, session, discussion group, everybody is asked to say their name and to tell their story of who they are, what they're about, and it would depend on the theme of that meeting. Everybody's invited to do it, even if it takes half an hour. Everybody goes around the room. There's that idea that everyone here is a leader, and maybe we need to take that into our church structures by allowing people to speak, allowing everyone to have a voice. I just remembered that one of the children on Sunday were leading our church. We had children leading church on Sunday, and she allowed everybody to speak by giving them the beginning part of a sentence, which they then had to complete. So it's easy for people to join in, because you've got to make it as easy as possible for people who are nervous about public speaking. So she simply said, "Jesus changed me when," and then people could join in. That's an initial step for people to share their story. And we just have to be absolutely brilliant at listening to hear what is being said, and then to pick up on it, I think. Push it a little further.
Yeah, it seems like for people who are shaped by the story, that often we lose sight of how important stories are for our communities of faith. Well, I'm going to step out of the way, and also Sherry just makes one more comment. She says, "I agree with leadership being collaborative. Perhaps instead of followers, leaders are those who seek co-laborers, working together under a common vision." Great comment.
That's really nice.
So
yeah, really nice. Co-laborers, yeah.
All right, Sherry from Pennsylvania, bring it on. Well, I'm going to step out of the way and Kerry, allow you to continue. Thank you so much.
Okay. So I just want to reiterate that if relational leadership is about being in relationship with people who follow us, or who are co-leading with us, co-working with us, and empowering them to become leaders, then I also want to stress that the process of developing and empowering leaders is just as important as the end result. So we just talked a little bit about that. How can we get people to become leaders? Well, it is my belief that that process, getting them there to that point, is as important as the end result of them taking up any particular leadership role. Here's the next picture. That's Maria. These are all pictures from our church, by the way, except for the Chesterbrook drawers is in my bedroom. So now I feel like you've been in my bedroom. Okay, let me give you an example. As a church, our entire church is involved in a campaign which is running in Britain at the moment to raise the minimum wage that employees are being paid to what's being called a living wage. So it's just lifting it, well, quite significantly actually, so that people are brought out of poverty. And we're really involved in that in our church and in campaigning for the living wage. It's a great campaign, and I believe in it with all of my heart. But what's been really interesting about how our church has been involved, what I mean is how the leaders have been empowered to work, is who has been doing that for us. Okay, so I could have just gone and represented our church and spoken at different campaigns and fed back to the church everything that was going on, but that's not how it happened in our church. we had four very unlikely people who stood up and identified with this understanding of living on a low wage, who stood up and represented our church and became leaders. Now, these four people are people who would be absolutely on the margins for different reasons. And yet here they were, not only being given a voice, but being treated as leaders who were able to go and represent our church, speaking with some very top politicians, British politicians, about this whole idea, even meeting with the Prime Minister himself to talk about the living wage. Now, that just wouldn't happen if we were just to think about people with a particular position being given leadership authority to go and speak on behalf of the church. This was a complete role reversal. Now, the fact is the living wage is getting better. Things are happening, and that's great. But as great as that, for me, has been the development and the empowering, the unlocking of leadership potential in those four people from our church, and the way that they've been able to grow and share their testimony. And that's how they've done it. They've just told their own stories about their own lack of money, their homelessness, their addictions, different things like that, so that they could talk about it with integrity, more than I could do. And who can argue with a story? And here they are with hundreds of people actually following them and getting behind them over this campaign about the living wage. I could have taken the lead, but look how much more prophetic it is to allow other people to do that for us, to lead for us, and to take other people along with them. They've flourished in unbelievable ways. It's been fantastic. I guess there's another quite obvious aspect to relational leadership which needs mentioning. I think many of us are familiar with bureaucratic leadership as being this kind of thing, like a triangle. So it's top down, is what people say. A small group of people, or even one person at the top, passing on the information to the others, so it gets passed out, and action is taken, tasks are completed, things are highly organised. It's a triangle pyramid shape. If people are inspired, it's not that they're not inspired, but it's a kind of pyramid shape. But a relational leadership then is taking this shape and not so much turning it upside down as making it like this, like a line, like in the wardrobe where you would hang your clothes up. The clothing rail is taking leadership and making it like this, from this triangle to a line structure. It makes it flat. So how do we do that? It's very, very difficult to take that and turn it into that. Although it is possible, and sometimes highly effective actually, to stand and lead people from the front and to take control and to take charge and say, this is what we're going to do, and forge your way forward. The reality is that most leadership actually happens in an interactive context between individuals or in a group. That's here's a kitchen. These are some people from our church working in the kitchen. Come back to the kitchen. That's why our leader in the kitchen, and wherever you are, you will identify your kind of kitchen person. Your leader in the kitchen can be more effective than a prayer ministry coordinator. If you've ever been in a kitchen and spent time with people in a kitchen who are preparing for a meal at church or refreshments after church or something like that, you will know that what's going on inside that kitchen is 100% relational. Pass me this and it gets passed. Do this. Shall I do that? I'll do that. You do that. It's all relational. Everybody is working together for a common task, and they're supporting each other in that task. They will, however, always be under the inspiration and the leadership of one person. One person will be driving that, setting the menu possibly. They might be the person who's serving, I don't know. They'll be the person in charge in that kitchen context, and everyone else will be following them. The group is highly organised, but when somebody new comes into the kitchen, what's the first thing that they say as they step over the threshold into the kitchen? I guarantee the first thing that they will say is, what can I do? It's very, very unlikely that someone will step into that environment and say, do this, and start leading. That just doesn't happen, because it's already within that kitchen a sense of leadership going on. And there's already a sense that when you come in here, you become a follower and you join in with what we're doing, a co-leader. I think it was Elizabeth said, you join in with what's happening here. And I find that really, really fascinating. It's as if that atmosphere of following passes on by osmosis to anybody that comes in. And I challenge you, if you are church leaders yourself, just to hang out in the kitchen from time to time. And even if you're not, just hang out in the kitchen from time to time. I'd like to do it every few weeks. Don't do it too often, or you'll upset the balance of what's going on. Because it's in the kitchen that you'll really find a lot of the power source. That's where people will congregate and they'll chat and they'll talk. And if you want to affect change, you're almost better doing it in that kind of environment than you are standing at the front, although that is necessary sometimes. But relational leadership would say, hang out in the kitchen, do the washing up with everyone, peel the potatoes, whatever's going on, and you can really affect some change, and the dynamics are great in that kind of thing. It'll take you weeks from a pulpit to do that. It could take you just one session in the kitchen to do that in that kind of environment. Relational leadership reminds us that relationships are absolutely at the focal point, the heart of leadership. Relationships are the main things. It's not about what we're saying, it's about our relationships with each other. On an aside, for those of you who are pastors, going into the kitchen and working into the kitchen is great for pastoral work, because people, when they've got their hands in the sink, they open up in a way that they wouldn't normally do. So it's got a dual purpose there. If you're a pastor yourself, head into the kitchen and spend some time there. Stan, anything you want to jump in with here?
Yeah, there's some great conversation that's taking place. First of all, I don't want to forget about Martin's comment that he made earlier, and so he did share that. He said we are called to be both leaders and followers, and that actually that's a bit of what relational leadership looks like in their context in the poorest communities in Scotland. And would you like to, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to Martin.
Well, now I understand what he means. I absolutely agree. So although I am one of the central leaders, myself and Nick, we also are followers on so many things that people are leading. Somebody else takes that up. It's like a relay race. He's hit the nail on the head. Yeah, sometimes we're followers, sometimes we're leaders. But I'm not sure that, I don't know if he's saying that some people are called just to be followers, not to lead. I think I would challenge that, Martin, and say that there is leadership potential in everybody, but we just need to maybe reframe our understanding of what leadership is.
Okay. And then we in that conversation about leaders and cleaning toilets, Robert Morris makes an interesting comment, and I've seen this as well. There are some who clean the toilets who will not let anyone forget that they are the ones who clean the toilets. And they go on and on and on about cleaning the toilets, and those persons are not leaders in my estimation.
No, just by virtue of doing the washing up or cleaning the toilets, it doesn't make you a leader. I think I'm talking about, you can picture them, I'm sure. These are the people who will say, for example, Rob, who I showed you a picture of, his sister Denise is a classic case of this. I've asked her to, it's Pancake Sunday, we're having pancakes on Sunday, and I've said, would you make some pancakes? Yes, so she's already planned, she's got all these people coming to help her to do the pancakes, because she's just said, you need to come, and they'll come. So I'm not talking about just the act of cleaning toilets or the act of doing the washing up, it's the character of the person.
And then there's been a considerable dialogue going on related to Sherry's comment about being co-laborers. And so Dennis shares the insight. The people who have inspired me the most to follow them were those who, by their demeanor, words, and actions, convinced me that they genuinely cared for others and for me, whether their leadership agreed with or challenged my own opinions or ideas. These are people who pay attention to what's going on around them, listen deeply to what others are saying, and offer skilled guidance and creativity in problem solving and envisioning.
Yeah, this is a key thing about listening. I really like listening, and I like other people to learn how to listen, because I think this is one of the main attributes of a central leader, far more than someone who can stand up and speak, is the ability to listen to what's really being said and listen to what people are trying to say and to take it on board and move it forward and empower others. That is so fundamental. I mean, Jesus did it, didn't he? He listened to what was going on. He even uses the phrase, if you have ears to hear, then hear. Listen to what's going on. That's such a key gift that central kind of leaders need.
And then Ashley commented too, as well, that in terms of the co-laborers, it speaks a lot about the partnership that God invites us into.
Yeah. I mean, God is relationship. If you were to use a word to kind of explain who is God, God is relationship. It's there in the Trinity, God in relationship with himself, and therefore this idea of co-working relationship is there in the Trinity. It's a biblical example for us, and that's what we need to be doing. We're co-workers with God, but also with each other here on earth until we make this place a picture of heaven.
And then also Sherry follows with a comment where to what she said earlier, that it seems to her that God's leadership style is more invitational rather than positional.
Yes, it's magnetic though, isn't it? So I wonder, it is invitational rather than positional. Yes, it is. I get that. I understand that. I like that. But it's even more than invitational, because you're drawn to him, aren't you? You don't. Oh, this is getting into a whole thing about free will, I guess. But just that idea that you could be drawn to a leader. That's how it is here on earth, isn't it? We're drawn to people who lead. They sometimes don't even have to ask us. We're drawn to them. I like that idea of God being invitational. Very nice.
Just from observing the comments and everything, I wonder if some of the things that we're not talking in terms of leadership, that we respond to people, and also we respond to God because there's a sense of hope, and there's a real sense of compassion. And that compassion isn't just understanding, but that compassion is that we're willing to do something about it. So even for a leader, we're drawn to people that are compassionate, that are willing, that understand recognize, they hear, they see, recognize what's going on, but they're willing to do something about it as well. It's like they're willing to...
We are drawn, we are drawn to those people, and we need them around us, actually. But do you not think also as a leader we need to be drawn to people who aren't compassionate, and people who are difficult and challenging and unlovable in some ways? And that would be the real great thing, wouldn't it, to be able to draw the leadership potential out of those people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's go on, and we'll pick up with conversation a little later. Thank you.
Okay. So I was just saying about relationship being God. God is relationship. It's the heart of the Trinity. God in relationship with himself. And it's my belief that relationality is really the building block of church. Our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. We need to get to know people in our church, not just as people who we might get something out of, but as real people. Not just people in the church as well, people in the fringe of the church, people in our community, and value them just because we're people, not because they're people, and not because they might have the potential to go on to lead the worship or to look after the finance, but just because they're people, even if they're very difficult. And I'm thinking through that idea of being drawn to people who are compassionate. Yes, we do need those. We need those people around us, but also being drawn to people who are not so nice to be around and difficult to be around, and see if we can really make that grace, prophetic leadership work in their lives. Let's see if I've got another picture here. What we're doing. That was from Sunday. The children were leaving church, and there we are. learning a song. Some friends of ours taught us this phrase, I don't know where it came from or whether they made it up, which is we together. So we together do these different things. And it's been a phrase that's been quite important to Nick and I in regards to our church. So relational leadership for me is about creating that feeling of we together in our churches, in our small groups, in whatever context we find ourselves in. How do we create we together? We together own the vision of this church. We together take responsibility for the actions that we do. We together empower others to take the leadership responsibility that they are capable of doing. I suppose it's a bit like turning your church into a family. Now, I know families can fight and squabble, and we all know that that can happen in every single church. We can have the fights and the squabbles. But like a family, and I'm hoping we're getting somewhere there anyway in our church, I like to think that like a family, we are fiercely proud of each other. So within families, on the whole, people tend to be really proud of what their blood relations have achieved or can achieve. And I like to think that in our own churches, we can create that we together because of relational leadership that makes us fiercely proud of each other and of what each other can do. So it'll become almost in our DNA, our we together DNA, that we promote each other and set each other up to succeed, like you would do for a family member. You would promote them and set them up to succeed. And relational leadership is great because it cascades like that from one person on to the next person. Because as soon as one person experiences what it's like to be empowered to go and lead, they can't help but tell somebody else and do the same for somebody else. It's like this big family where you're proud of each other and wanting to be we together take responsibility for leading this church. I'm going to tell you another story about something that we're grappling with. This was on Sunday as well, something that we're just trying to think through. So probably I should get back to you in a year's time to say how we are with this. It's a story about worship in our church and how we're trying to come to terms with how we do relational leadership, we together worship in our church. We've been thinking about it for a few months and we're still mulling it over. We like the idea of relational leadership, and in fact the strategy for our church really is simply relationship. That's it. Relationship with God and each other, with our partners in the area, with our community, relationship. And we've tried to reflect that relationship ethos in our Sunday gatherings, in our meetings, in our services. And we've been able to do that in many ways. Our teaching, the way that we're preaching, has always been multi-voiced. So when we're sharing something from God's Word, we're always asking, what do you think? How are you going to get involved in this? What does Jesus say to you here? What do you think the Bible is trying to say? It's multi-voiced. It's a collective kind of sermon, if you like. We get involvement from everybody. Sometimes even if you don't ask for involvement, or those of you who are in inner cities churches will know what I'm talking about. You might not even ask for it, but you still get people interjecting into your multi-voice sermon, forming this collective sermon. We're also very keen on storytelling and testimony. We try every week to include a time for people to share their story. What has God been doing in your life? So it becomes we together are here learning about God and sharing our lives together and with God. We together are sharing in worship. But more recently, we felt a bit on edge, Nick and I, who are the kind of central leaders, we felt a bit on edge about how we do worship. You see, the thing is that everything else is multi-voiced, but what's tended to happen with the way that we do our sung worship is that you'll have a group of people, a band at the front, who are leading everybody else. And so you kind of get this professional musician thing going on, and then everybody else. And I know that happens in lots of different churches, and we felt it was a bit at odds with our relational leadership style. So what we've attempted to do is to throw it all back into the congregation so that we together can worship. And what we've done is we've bought 12 ukuleles, little mini guitar-y type things with 4 strings, They're very, very trendy here in London at the moment. That's the thing to have. They're not expensive, so they weren't too difficult for us to buy, and they're easy to learn. We bought 12 ukuleles, and people have been taught how to play some simple chords. Now on a Sunday, the ukuleles will come out together with a whole other array of instruments, drums and tambourines and bells and all the rest of it. Plus, people have been invited to bring their guitars, trombone has come along, a clarinet, a banjo, a mandolin, anything that you can, you bring it along. People are sitting in the congregation. You can see a little bit of that on that photo I've put up. There's some people sitting there in the congregation, and we together produce the music for the church. This is relational leadership. We together are doing this. So on all of our songs, we have the words on the screen with the chords underneath so that people can join in. We together are doing it. Now, the thing is, you still need to have somebody leading it, leading the singing. So we're still kind of working it all out. But the idea is that I'm hoping that in 6 months' time we'll be able to do it. We will know a small-ish group of songs so well that it's not needed for me or Nick to organise what songs we're going to sing, to direct our worship, but that can come from the congregation themselves, so that we would have time when anyone can just start singing a song and we'll all join in because we know it. That's the idea. We together are worshipping. We're all empowered. We all become the worship leader. It's not just for me or Nick or anybody else. We all become the worship leader. But I've got a question for you to help me about. This is serious. I don't know the answer to this. So you have to tell me from all of your wisdom. The whole relational thing is very, very fluid. And it's great. It's really great. I love it. But it's very difficult at the same time because it's so fluid. There are no clear boundaries. Nobody's in, no one's out. It's not about programs. It's about people. It's not about numbers. It's about quality and all the rest of it. So given that we've had so many years of being able to work out our church structures through bureaucratic systems and bureaucratic leadership, we now need to form new ideas for relational leadership. And the big one for us is, how do we mark success? So that's what I want you to give me the answers to now, if you've got any ideas. How can we, as a church attempting to lead relationally and attempting to be we together, mark success? Dan, are you coming in? I can hear a voice.
I'm coming in, so I'm waiting. Let's wait for people to respond. What an interesting idea. I can see music stores in our communities receiving requests to buy ukuleles. What a great idea to build a multi-voice worship in such a simple way to do that. So, what? Go ahead.
Go ahead. Some other ideas about what people are thinking about how do we, come back on the worship as well, that would be good, but how do we mark success? Because I don't want to be, just because I'm relational, I don't want to be disorganized. I want to be organized. I want to know what's going on. I want to be intentional. So what are the indicators that we're achieving what we've set out to do? Do you understand what I mean? And how can we record them? Because typically you'd record statistics, wouldn't you? And you'd record, okay, so we've started X amount of Bible studies this year, Bible study groups this year, whatever. You'd have that kind of thing. How do we do it now? That's a kind of business model. How do we do it now? New Testament church model, relational leadership. How can we be sure that we're not just drifting off, but that we do have an accountability here? How can we mark those indicators?
Yeah. Are the indicators that the willingness of people to, interact with each other, the wanting to get together? What are some of those indicators? Here are some responses that are starting to come in. We mark success the same as Jesus. We make disciples. Also, let's see, the pages are flipping through now. Accountability is different than success. One way is to measure success is to listen to the prayers that are offered. Listen to have individuals communicate to God openly. Let's see, you bring it back to storytelling. You have case studies exactly as to what you have brought us today. Tom writes, moving to a multi-voice style is hard when a congregation is used to a single laity, controlled leadership. Pastor is seen as employee, not a leader. It also, Ashley, also brings it back to the way in which your church is willing to get involved. So those are some of the things. Samuel writes, we build success by a sense of togetherness, communal, which can be difficult in our individualistic Western society. More about recording stories and sharing stories. So it seems like that's how people are really connecting to what you're saying and responding to your question. Jeremy writes, I think in terms of relational ministry as opposed to relational leadership. Ministry is generally often a form of leadership. I'm relational with my peers and patients. And Jeremy is writing from the ministry of being a hospital chaplain or being a chaplain in a medical system. Karen Castle from Roanoke, Virginia, made an observation. You sound a little Quaker, which is a compliment. And then I'm going to go push up a little further above. There are some comments on, some relation on leadership, because people were bringing up the idea of how do we call out gifts. And so some people, I mentioned that they use some kind of gifts discernment process within the congregation. Andy writes, I've noticed in a lot of congregations I have been involved with that gifts discernment programs and processes tend to have preconceived positions to fill by forcing people to fit the role. And what if we looked at a person, discerned their gifts, and created a new role that fits them? Well, that's the whole idea I understand behind spiritual gifts. Too many round pegs in square holes. This would seem to be a move from a bureaucratic to relational leadership. This might encourage people to see their personal gifts as significant and also inspire them to serve more fully. I think that's I think that's a great response. Martin responds, I think that we are called to leadership, and then these are statements that came in before you asked the question, but I think really fit, that leadership potential exists in all of us, and part of our problem is that we don't always recognize leadership in apparently unlikely people. The people at the margins of our society are often the best leaders, at least in my experience. These are the people who have helped me to see what God is doing much more effectively. And then Jonathan, I like to think of leadership as a function required within groups. Different people become leaders at different times depending on the needs of the group, and leaders' influence can either be positive, contributing to growth, or negative, blocking or even injuring growth. And the primary pastoral task is to keep space for leaders' gifts to emerge in a positive manner. And he says, I agree with Kerry that this is primarily done relationally.
It's really hard to do, isn't it? To leave space for people to do that, because as a leader, you want to do it, You have to, it's costly to the actual central leader to step back and to let other people lead. Sorry, Stan, you were...
Well, no, it kind of, I heard one person say, and I really like this phrase, and I've adapted it somewhat, but for example, congregations or the church structures that we work in, perhaps our approach to leadership is that they are problems to be fixed. And rather than seeing them as problems to be fixed, we need to see these congregations, our people, as mysteries to be embraced.
Yes, that's really good, yes.
And maybe if we did so, that would allow us that space to really bring people into this greater space of sharing their stories and sharing their gifts.
Yeah. I say something that has happened in our church is, as we've noticed a leadership potential in somebody and there was nothing happening around that particular gifting, we've had to start it or bring that into the whole function of the church. that goes back to that spiritual gifts one that somebody said about not just trying to identify where they are, but actually just letting it's organic, actually, isn't it, Stan? It's just what's happening. Let's see where God is taking us with this person, and we'll follow on and see what happens. But I also recognize I come from a very, very fortunate position of having started this church, and we could set it up along that theme, and it would have been a much harder task had we come into a church which was particularly organized. I do recognize that.
And perhaps that in some ways of this, the relational measurements, and it's hard and messy. How is it that we measure we're being, as someone said earlier, we're being invited into God's partnership, being able to participate in this thing called community and ministry and to bring out those gifts? How do we do? Yeah.
How do we measure that we're doing that? I like that somebody said listening about the prayers, what people say in their prayers, because you get real honesty in prayers. I quite like that. And the storytelling, what has God done in your life this week? I mean, we're not talking about a testimony that happened 20 years ago. It's this week. What has God done this week since we saw you last? What has God done? I guess we just have to measure it through storytelling, don't we? We just have to say, well, look at the transformation. We often think about the conversion experience as being a change of heart in our church. So I can think of people who have had an enormous change of heart even from how they were when we first met them, but certainly from how they were 20 years ago, 25 years ago. This change of heart, that's a story to tell, isn't it? And maybe we just need to record it. I mean, this is a way of recording. What I'm saying now, I guess I'm putting down for eternity. This is what's happening in our church. This is my story of relational leadership where we are. But it is very, very difficult, and I'm not going to in any way say that it's an easy thing to do. It's very difficult to lead relationally. In fact, that was something I was going to come on to. Can I just
go ahead.
Step in on that? Is that okay?
This is your time.
Okay. Because it is exciting. It's so exciting to be a leader who is, I'm a highly relational person myself, and so to be able to be released to be a relational leader is just such a blessing and a gift, and I can be as creative as I want, and I'm a bit wowed by that, really. But it hasn't come without a cost. There has been a cost involved in the whole thing about being a relational leader. So in my experience, relational leader is costly in time, because I have had to, it takes longer to let somebody else do something than you, doesn't it? You know, when you're developing and empowering new leaders, something you could do quite quickly can take a lot longer for somebody else to do, but it's worth it, but it is costly in terms of time. It can be costly financially sometimes to a church if people need to be skilled up in, practical things like health and safety and first aid or spiritual gifts or whatever. If they need to be skilled up, then there's a financial cost involved there for being relational. It's costly emotionally because, again, in my experience, when you start to unpack that that leadership potential in someone, when you start to empower them, then out comes all the other stuff at the same time. So out will come all the hurts from the past, or their bitterness, or bad things that have happened to them, or bad things that they have done to other people. It will all come out as a course, which is our role as pastors. Those of you who are pastors, that's our role, and that's what we're there to do and to listen. But it's that's not easy when you know what's going to happen. As soon as you ask somebody to do something and you're pushing them a bit and you know that's going to happen, it's costly, isn't it, to do that kind of thing. And I think the last costliness thing is to your own ego as a leader. If you're the one who's used to being able to run the show and do the whole thing, and you've got to step back and let somebody else do it, there's another cost. I'm being honest about it. There's a cost there, isn't there, to your own ego.
Yeah, and sometimes I think we're prone to bring in those bottom line figures and recognize, hey, ministry in a congregation is much different than a business. and yet we try to bring in that business organizational structure into it. But if I'm in a business and I tell someone to turn right, they better turn right. And I've heard some business leaders talk about how they transitioned from one of the business into more of a faith-based community, and they said, what was one of the biggest learning factors for them? And they said, well, when I told someone to turn right, they looked at me and they said, why? He said, they said, we never got that kind of response, or at least that they were brave enough to verbalize that. But, so it does go back to influence, relationship, and all those other, the measuring sticks are definitely different.
Yeah. And letting people have their say as well. To feel wanted and included and needed, and that they have a voice. I guess it's about giving people a voice. How many? That could be a way to judge it. How many people in your church have a voice? Yeah. Maybe that's a way to kind of.
Yeah. I'm just there's people still responding to the question, and so I'm just going to read a couple things. You can follow me, Kerry. Tom says, I like the This Week focus, giving testimony to the mystery that is appreciated and revealed. Elizabeth, let God and let go and let God. Many have control issues, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of stubbornness. Yep. Being vulnerable and connect in a friendship is having authority. And then James writes, difficult to measure success when a church may have one idea of how they measure success and a denomination may have another version. There's tension. Yeah. Brandy, I often tell parishioners that I'm not to do the work of prayer, Bible reading instead of you. Part of my job is to encourage my parishioners and empower them to be doing these things and growing in their own gifts and relationship with Christ. Let's see. Business. Let's see. Tom Dowdy. To be a relational leader requires a lot of patience. You realize the time is less important than seeing a person grow and develop. Gerald. Perhaps we are called to be a potluck people. Each of us bring in our gifts to share and one another as we do in potluck meals. The way our gifts are received.
Hang on, can I just check? Is that when you just bring anything you want to me?
Yeah, potluck is when you bring anything you want. Some people may sign up to bring dessert, appetizers, salads, main courses. Each of us bring. Jacob's
joy. Okay.
Yeah. So Gerald is making the comment, he says, perhaps we are called to be a potluck people, each of us bringing our gifts to share with one another as we do in potluck meals. The way our gifts are received with gratitude encourage us to continue sharing. And
yes, because if you're receiving someone's gift with gratitude, you're actually following them, aren't you? You're hanging on there every word.
Roland Johnson, I wonder how Jesus measured his success. And Jeremy, though, does make a comment, no potlucks in the UK. I think I might like that. Maybe Jeremy has been to too many bad potlucks.
Oh, no. We have them. We just call them a different name. I was thinking about Jesus, Stan. Always good to do. And I thought, how did he measure his success? Well, he talked a lot about servant leadership. And so the washing of the feet, which will all be happening around the UK anyway on Monday, Thursday, I don't know whether it all happens where you are, that whole act, that humbling attitude of washing somebody else's feet actually makes that person, who is a servant, who makes that person a leader. So I think Jesus saw leadership and upside down to how we tend to see it. Well, we tend to see it in that business model, don't we? Or did he see himself as a success? Is that what you said?
Well, and Roland is asking, I wonder how Jesus measured his success. Yeah.
How he measured success.
This also brings to mind in terms of what are some of the measuring sticks, and maybe it's something in the way, related to discipleship. How is it that we are coming together as the gathered community? How is it that we're calling people out to use their gifts within the gathered community for the community as well as to bless the larger community? How is it that we're forming people, and how is it that we're sending people?
I was just thinking this might be helpful to some people about early on when we were planting this church. This is before we were thinking about what style of leadership or anything. We were just doing it, having as many cups of tea as possible. One of the ways that the main way that we looked to see how well are we doing, we called it a mission indicator actually, was how many people are talking about Jesus in their own home. And that for us was the most important thing. How many people have, you know what I mean? Because if you take it home, then you've really taken it home. So I'm just trying to think whether that can translate to leadership style. Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to have a sleepless night, Stan. Yeah, I'm going to be waking
okay, sure. Just Skype me.
Yeah.
Well, people that know me well know that I'm up into the early mornings anyhow. So I have one of those weird body schedules. Also, just a few more comments are coming in. Jane says we always have lunch quiche, and then. Jeremy responds, Jesus had relationships and was willing to be authentic regardless of the cost. And then Brandy responds, I think maybe Jesus' success was measured by how well he followed the will of God. But when we follow the will of God, we can't always say we'll be successful. Jesus was crucified, and that didn't look very successful. So great observations.
That's great.
So yeah. Well, Kerry, we have 7 minutes left in our time.
Okay.
How would you like to conclude with your thoughts, and I'll step away.
I'll finish my thoughts, and then we can have any questions if you want at the very, very end. If there's anything that I've said, you can bring it in at the end. Okay. So here we are, relational leadership. So despite all of that, not quite knowing what it is, it's not so tangible as a bureaucratic style, despite knowing that it can be, or in spite of knowing that it can be incredibly difficult and challenging and painful and draining and costly and all of those things, it's also a fantastic thing to get yourself involved in. It's great to lead people and to take them somewhere, but it's even better to lead them into leading other people. I mean, that's really how we're going to spread the love of God around the world, I think, just to share, to get other people to take responsibility for sharing it, so that we together are involved in this thing called the kingdom of heaven, not just one or two people who are leaders. So I guess it's my prayer for you as you're continuing in your ministry, whatever it will be, that you will enjoy being a relational leader, not just because you want to be a shepherd, but because you want to be a midwife, and because you want to see other people birthed into this whole new experience of leading. You want to see other people being empowered and living life to the full, and taking the bull by the horns and all those things, and stepping out in faith and being the leaders that God has created them to be, using their full potential, all their gifts, all their skills, all their talents that they can use as future leaders. It's a beautiful thing to be involved in prophetic relational leadership, particularly involved in people who are potential leaders in the future. It's so wonderful to be involved in prophetic leadership, and I think of people in my own church who are the most unlikely people to lead, who are leading, and it's such a blessing to be in their company and to hear how God uses them and hear what God has to say to them. And it's a great thing to be a midwife to something like that, step back and have a look and see what's being birthed right before my very eyes. Relationality is the building block of the church. God is relationship. We are in relationship with God. We are in relationship with each other. And I guess my prayer is that you may experience the power of relationship with others, and that as you experience the power of empowering other people, that you'll be drawn closer into the heart of God, drawn closer to him in relationship, him who is a loving, empowering, relational God. Amen to that. Dan, has anybody got any last questions? We've got 3 minutes.
Sherry made the comment, thank you for the image of midwife for pastor leader, very helpful. Elizabeth writes, no man or woman is an island. We have to stay connected. Karen also echoed the idea of the developing midwives. And Thomas, grace to grace to grace. And so Dennis, Kerry used the word midwife. That has become a more meaningful and descriptive leadership term or concept for me. Someone who uses their skills to help others give birth to goals and ideas they have been working on. Great. And a few more people are talking. What we want to do is Kerry will stay online, and we're going to invite Enton in to share some closing information regarding continuing education and other pertinent information. Enton?